He thought it was just another storm, a broken down truck, a cold night, and a loyal dog by his side. But inside that forgotten house, something was waiting. A story buried beneath 70 years of silence. A secret only faith could uncover. Sometimes miracles don't shout, they whisper. Stay with us till the end and witness how God's light still shines, even in the darkest places. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, because someone out there might still be waiting for their own miracle. The November winds screamed through the mountains of Maine, dragging sheets of icy rain across a road that hadn't seen fresh pavement in decades. Ethan Cole gripped the steering wheel of his rusted Ford pickup, his knuckles pale against the cracked leather. He was 47, with a lean, hard-worked body that carried the quiet endurance of a man who had known both war and solitude. His hair, dark brown streaked with silver, fell just above his collar, damp from the cold air seeping through the truck's worn seals. The stubble on his jaw had turned into a short beard, not from fashion, but from neglect. His eyes, a deep gray like the Atlantic in winter, stared into the storm ahead with the calm of someone who had long accepted that life rarely offered mercy. Beside him, his dog Max, a 6-year-old German shepherd, shifted uneasily. Max's fur was thick sable and tan, his ears sharp, his body built for precision. A scar ran down his right flank, a souvenir from a past deployment when he and Ethan had been military partners in Afghanistan. Max was trained, obedient, but the sound of thunder still made his muscles twitch. Ethan reached over and laid a hand on the dog's head. "Easy, boy," he murmured. His voice was low, roughened by years of shouting orders in desert wind and silence since. He had been driving for hours, hoping to deliver an old generator to a cabin near Baxter Ridge. The job was small money, but it kept his hands busy and the nightmares away. He liked solitude, the kind that didn't demand conversation or eye contact. After losing 2 soldiers under his command to a roadside explosion 12 years ago, Ethan had decided that being alone was safer, for everyone. Outside, the storm thickened. The wipers struggled to push aside the torrents of rain. The headlights carved only a narrow tunnel through the mist. Suddenly the engine coughed, a sharp metallic sputter that made Ethan's stomach sink. "Not now," he muttered. He tapped the gas, but the truck answered with another dying choke before rolling to silence. The dashboard lights dimmed, then died entirely. For a long second, he sat motionless, listening. Rain drummed on the roof like 1,000 fists. The wind howled across the pines. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. Dead. He exhaled through his nose, the sound a mix of frustration and resignation. "Well, Max," he said quietly, "looks like we're spending the night out here." The dog shifted, whining softly. The cab was already growing cold, the damp air creeping in through the seams. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter around him. It was an old military-issue leather coat, the lining torn but still faintly smelling of oil and gunmetal. He looked at Max, his friend, his reminder of purpose, and something inside him refused to let the animal suffer the cold. He opened the door. The wind slammed against him, slicing through the thin jacket. The rain hit like shards of glass. He squinted into the darkness. The forest rose on both sides of the road, a wall of black trunks swaying like the sea. Then, through the blur of water and fog, he saw it. A shape half hidden by the storm. A gate. He grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and trudged toward it, boots sinking in mud. The beam caught rusted iron twisted into ornate patterns. A heavy brass padlock hung from a chain, corroded to a dull green. Behind the gate, the outline of an old driveway climbed a slope into the trees. At the top, barely visible, loomed the silhouette of a large structure, an old manor, its roofline jagged against the lightning. Ethan hesitated. The rational part of him said, "Turn back, stay in the truck, wait for morning." But the thought of Max freezing in the cab made the decision for him. "Shelter's shelter," he muttered. He returned to the truck, water streaming from his hair. Max was standing now, alert. "Come on, partner," Ethan said, grabbing a crowbar from behind the seat. "Let's get inside before we turn to ice." The padlock broke with a dull snap after a few heavy strikes. The gate creaked open, groaning like an old ship. Ethan led Max through, his flashlight trembling in the wind. The path beyond was a wreck, overgrown weeds, broken branches, and a thin stream of rainwater cutting down the middle. As they climbed the hill, the manor grew clearer, tall, dark, its windows shattered, its front porch sagging. It looked less like a house and more like something time had forgotten. When they reached the steps, Ethan stopped to catch his breath. His boots squelched in the mud. "Well, Max," he said, "home sweet home." The dog sniffed the air, nose twitching. Lightning flickered, illuminating the house's facade. A weathered plaque near the door read Holloway Estate, letters barely legible through decades of rust. Ethan pushed the front door. It didn't move. He tried again, shoulder braced, but it was locked solid. He stepped back, scanning the structure. On the right side, a smaller porch jutted out, maybe a servant's entrance or sunroom. He led Max there. Several windows were broken, the frames warped by age. One, low to the ground, had no glass at all. He laid his jacket over the sill, then crawled through, landing on cold wood. Max followed, leaping smoothly. The room smelled of dust and salt. Cobwebs hung like thin curtains. Ethan swept the flashlight across faded wallpaper, peeling in strips. "Cozy," he said under his breath. He found a half-collapsed chair and sat, breathing heavily. His mind drifted to old barracks, places where the air had smelled the same. Wood rot, old metal, fear. The kind of places where silence felt alive. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake the weight pressing behind his eyes. He had told himself years ago that the past was buried, that the ghosts stayed overseas. But sitting in that room, he wasn't so sure. Max settled beside him, curling against his boots, eyes watchful. The dog's breath fogged in the cold air. Ethan reached down, scratching behind his ears. "You've seen worse, huh?" he whispered. Max's tail thumped once, a quiet agreement. The flashlight beam landed on a framed photograph hanging crooked on the wall. He rose and brushed off the dust. It showed a man in his 30s, clean-shaven, standing proudly in front of the very house they were in. Beside him was a woman with soft features and a child, a girl of about 8, clutching a small stuffed bear. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. Families. That word had become a ghost to him long ago. He looked around the room again. The silence was heavy, but not hostile, just forgotten. "Who were you?" he murmured to the faces in the photo. "And what did you leave behind here?" A crack of thunder rolled overhead, shaking dust from the ceiling. The flashlight flickered, then steadied. Ethan took a long, slow breath. For the first time in years, he felt something close to purpose. Not the kind born from duty, but from curiosity, from the quiet call of stories untold. Max lifted his head, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the archway. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered. The dog didn't growl. He simply listened, muscles tense. Then he relaxed, laying his head back down. Ethan smiled faintly. "Probably just the wind." Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the house exhaled softly through its cracked walls, as if relieved to have someone within again. Ethan leaned back, exhaustion settling in. His clothes were soaked, his hands numb, but Max's steady breathing beside him eased the loneliness that had clung to him for years. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythm of rain on the roof. He didn't know what waited inside this place, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely lost. The manor might have been abandoned for decades, but tonight it had saved 2 lives. The fire flickered weakly in the old stone hearth, casting long, trembling shadows over the shrouded furniture. Ethan sat on the floor beside Max, feeding the flames with pieces of splintered chair legs. The dry wood crackled and popped, the sound too small for such an enormous silence. The house seemed to swallow every noise, as if afraid to wake something sleeping beneath its own history. The smell of wet leather, dust, and old smoke mingled in the cold air. Ethan leaned back against the wall, rubbing warmth into his hands. His jacket steamed slightly from the heat. Max lay close, his massive head resting on his paws, his ears twitching every time the wind pressed against the windows. The dog's golden brown eyes reflected the firelight, patient and intelligent. "You hear that?" Ethan murmured as a faint creak echoed from upstairs. Max lifted his head, muscles tensing. Ethan's pulse slowed rather than sped up. Fear was a luxury he had unlearned long ago. He picked up his flashlight, its beam cutting a pale scar through the darkness above the staircase. "Guess we're not alone, huh?" He rose carefully, every joint protesting. The wooden stairs groaned under his boots, releasing tiny clouds of dust. The air grew colder with each step. Max followed silently, his paws soundless but sure. At the top, a long corridor stretched into darkness. White sheets draped over forgotten furniture, and cobwebs hung like lace from the ceiling. The smell was sharper here, old linen and faint sea salt. Halfway down the hall, Ethan paused. A door stood slightly ajar. He nudged it open with the flashlight. Inside, moonlight leaked through a cracked window, revealing a parlor lined with shelves. Dusty books leaned like tired soldiers. On the mantelpiece above a cold fireplace rested several framed photographs. He lifted one. A man in military dress uniform, upright and proud. His hair slicked back, eyes stern but not cruel. Another photo showed the same man beside a woman in an elegant 1940s gown. Grace Holloway, he guessed from the nameplate on the mantel. She was beautiful in a quiet, steady way, the kind of woman whose smile came from composure rather than mirth. Next to the photos lay a small brass locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of a child, a little girl with light curls, maybe 7 or 8. She wore a simple white dress and clutched a teddy bear almost her size. Ethan stared at the faces for a long moment, his expression softening. "You had a family," he whispered. The words felt like confession. Thunder rolled outside, shaking loose a few flakes of plaster. Max pressed against his leg. Ethan set the locket down carefully and turned back toward the hall. That was when he noticed it, something small lying near the doorframe. He crouched, picking it up. A photograph, brittle and faded, had slipped from its broken frame. It showed the same family standing proudly before this very house. The man's hand rested on his daughter's shoulder, the woman's smile bright with trust. Ethan brushed away the dust. For a second, he thought he saw movement behind the cracked glass, just a flicker, as if the child's eyes had caught the firelight. He blinked, but it was gone. He exhaled slowly. "Get a grip, Cole." He wasn't the kind to believe in ghosts. He believed in loss, the kind that stayed even when the bodies were gone. Back downstairs, he rekindled the fire and hung his damp jacket on a chair. The flames painted the room in gold and rust. His mind wandered to faces he hadn't seen in years. His platoon, the desert sky, a boy named Morales who had always hummed country songs before missions. He thought of the last time he had heard that humming, cut short by an explosion. He closed his eyes. Sometimes the dead were louder than thunder. A sudden noise snapped him back, a rhythmic creaking, light but deliberate, from the floor above. Max was already on his feet, tail stiff, ears pinned forward. Ethan stood, grabbing the flashlight again. "Stay," he ordered softly. Max hesitated but obeyed, lowering to a crouch, every muscle coiled. The sound came again. One step, then another, like someone pacing slowly across the upper hall. Ethan's boots made no sound on the dusty carpet as he moved toward the staircase. He held his breath, listening. The steps stopped. Silence returned, heavy as stone. He climbed anyway. At the top, the air felt charged, as if the house itself was holding its breath. He aimed the flashlight down the hall. Nothing. The sheets draped over the furniture swayed faintly in the draft. Then he saw it. A door at the end of the corridor, slightly open, moving back and forth with the wind. It tapped softly against the frame. The heartbeat of an empty house. Ethan exhaled, tension bleeding out of him. "Just the wind," he whispered. He turned off the flashlight, letting his eyes adjust. The moonlight through the cracked windows turned the hallway silver gray. He could almost imagine laughter echoing here once. Children running, someone calling them to dinner, the smell of soup, the warmth of life. All gone now. Only echoes? He descended quietly, his hand brushing the banister, polished smooth by long vanished hands. Back by the fire, Max waited, tail thumping once against the floor. Ethan crouched, rubbing the dog's head. "No ghosts, buddy, just a tired old house." Yet, even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. The silence that followed was too complete, too perfect, as though the house had been listening. He added another piece of wood to the fire. Sparks leapt up, swirling like fireflies before fading into smoke. The flames reflected in Max's eyes. Ethan looked toward the ceiling one last time, listening to the rain ease into a soft drizzle. Somewhere deep inside the manor, a faint sound, almost like a sigh, rose and vanished. He didn't move. For reasons he couldn't name, it didn't frighten him. It only made him feel less alone. Outside, the storm began to fade into the stillness of night. Inside, the house stood quiet once more, watchful, patient, waiting for morning. The morning came gray and hollow. The rain had stopped, but a thin mist lingered over the woods like the ghost of the storm. Ethan woke to the brittle sound of dripping water and the faint rustle of movement above him. Max was already standing, ears alert, gaze fixed on the ceiling. The dog let out a short, low bark, a signal, not alarm, but insistence. "What is it, boy?" Ethan muttered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Max moved to the narrow staircase at the end of the hall, his claws tapping lightly on the dusty floorboards, then sat and looked back expectantly. Ethan sighed. "The attic, huh? Figures you'd find trouble before breakfast." He grabbed his flashlight, climbed the creaking steps, and pushed open the hatch. A wave of cold, stale air rushed down, air that had not moved in decades. He coughed, pulling his jacket tighter as he hauled himself up into the gloom. The attic was a graveyard of forgotten life. Trunks, furniture, a child's tricycle with one wheel missing, boxes of books swollen from damp. A single window at the far end leaked pale light, enough to see shapes but not faces. Dust hung thick, sparkling like ash in the beam of his flashlight. Max followed, his nose to the floor, moving with the deliberate precision of a working dog on task. Then he stopped near a stack of broken picture frames and began to scratch, a slow, methodical motion that made the wood creak. Ethan crossed the room, crouched, and saw what had caught the dog's attention, a small wooden trunk, its surface cracked and warped. The brass latch was half broken, as though someone had tried to open it long ago. He brushed away the dust. The initials GH were carved faintly into the lid. He pressed his fingers under the latch and lifted. The metal gave way with a tired sigh. Inside, beneath a layer of moth-eaten cloth, lay a small leather-bound book. The cover was worn but intact, the edges darkened with age. A faint smell of lavender clung to it. Ethan turned the first page. The handwriting was elegant, careful, each letter a trace of dignity surviving time. Grace Holloway, January 4th, 1952. He sat cross-legged, flashlight propped beside him, and began to read. "The snow has not stopped for days. Lila asks when her father will come home, and I tell her soon. I do not know if it is true. The radio speaks of men missing near the 38th parallel. Victor's last letter came months ago." Ethan's thumb traced the faded ink. The words trembled with hope, then silence. Page after page painted the portrait of a woman slowly swallowed by loneliness. Grace wrote about rationing, about the piano gathering dust, about her daughter's laughter echoing through empty halls. Her tone was gentle but fragile, as though each entry was a thread holding her together. He turned another page. "I told Lila stories tonight about her father's bravery. She listens so carefully, as if memorizing him. Sometimes she sets his old cap on her head and salutes me. 'Just like Daddy,' she says." Ethan smiled faintly despite the chill creeping into his bones. He imagined the girl, bright eyes, small hands, pretending to be a soldier to make her mother smile. But the later entries darkened. "The snow grows deeper. We cannot leave. The road is gone. The generator failed this morning. I hear the sea closer than before. The waves are angry tonight." He flipped to the final pages. The handwriting had become hurried, slanted, as if written by shaking hands. "Something broke in the cellar door. Lila says she heard her father calling from below. I told her it was only the wind, but she insists. She took her lantern and went down. I followed, but the floor gave way near the wine racks. I heard her call my name, and then silence. If anyone finds this, please, find my little girl. The door to the lower cellar has collapsed." The last words trailed off mid-sentence, a smear of ink running down the page like a tear. Ethan sat frozen, staring at the page until his vision blurred. His breath came shallow and uneven. "Jesus," he whispered. He looked at Max, who had been sitting quietly, eyes fixed on him. She went after him. The kid went into the cellar. A cold draft swept across the attic, making the candle stub beside him flicker. For the first time since entering the house, Ethan felt something that wasn't just sadness. It was presence, as though someone still lingered, waiting for him to understand. He closed the diary gently, treating it like something alive. He took a long moment to collect himself. His mind replayed the words. The cellar. The door collapsed. Find my little girl. The pattern was clear, the kind of trail soldiers learned to follow. His instinct shifted from grief to resolve. We're not done here, Max. The dog stood, tail low but steady, as if he understood. Together, they descended from the attic, the floor groaning beneath their weight. Downstairs, the morning light filtered through shattered windows, painting pale bands across the dust. Ethan set the diary on the mantel, beside the photograph of the Holloway family. He stared at the faces again, the proud soldier, the gentle mother, the bright-eyed girl. He thought of all the years this house had stood silent, keeping their story buried. He rested a hand on the mantel, his calloused fingers brushing the cool frame. "All right, Grace," he said quietly. "We'll find her." Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the sea beyond the trees, gray, endless, and alive. The afternoon light had faded into a dim gray by the time Ethan set down the diary. The house was silent again, save for the faint ticking of an unseen clock somewhere deep in its bones. Max was restless, pacing in slow circles near the fireplace, nose twitching, tail stiff. The dog's movements were sharp, deliberate, an instinct at work. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked softly. Max didn't answer, of course, but his body did. He stopped at the far end of the room, near a warped stretch of floorboards, and began to sniff along a seam where two planks met. Ethan knelt beside him, brushing away a layer of dust. The boards were uneven, the edges slightly lifted. He pressed down on one, and it gave with a faint creak. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. He fetched the crowbar he'd used on the gate and wedged it beneath the loose plank. The wood resisted at first, then split with a groan, revealing a narrow, black gap beneath. A rush of air rose from the darkness, cold, damp, and ancient. The smell was unmistakable, mold, wet stone, and something metallic, like rusted iron or old blood. He shone the flashlight down. The beam vanished into a descending passage framed by rough bricks. "Guess this is what you've been looking for," Ethan said. Max peered over the edge, nose quivering. The dog's ears pinned back, but he didn't retreat. He was a soldier's dog, trained to follow, not to fear. Ethan took a breath, then climbed down, his boots scraping against the narrow rungs of an old iron ladder. The air grew colder with each step. When his feet touched the ground, they sank slightly into wet dirt. The beam of his flashlight cut through the gloom, catching glimmers of moisture on the stone walls. The cellar was small, perhaps 15 feet wide, but one side had collapsed, burying half the space under a heap of broken masonry. He turned slowly, the beam scanning across rusted wine racks, shattered bottles, and a cracked oak barrel oozing black liquid. Max descended behind him, landing lightly on the ground, his paws leaving clean prints in the damp earth. Ethan smiled faintly. "You're out of your mind, coming down here," he whispered. Max's tail gave a single, slow wag. Ethan moved deeper, his boots crunching over debris. The light caught something half buried beneath a fallen beam. A faint glint of metal. He crouched, brushing away the dirt. It was a small box, tin, rectangular, wrapped tightly in decayed oilcloth. His fingers trembled as he peeled it open. Inside, wrapped in layers of rotted paper, were three objects: a thin notebook, a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the name Lila, and a single folded letter. Ethan's throat tightened. The bracelet was small, made for a child's wrist. He could see faint scratches where it had been worn daily. His chest ached as he unfolded the letter. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting clumsy but careful, large loops, uneven lines. He read it, aloud under his breath. "Dear, whoever finds this, I heard Daddy calling. I went to find him. The door got stuck, and I can't get out. Please tell Mommy I'm not scared. I love her. Lila." The words blurred as Ethan's eyes filled. His hand shook slightly, the paper fluttering like a fragile heartbeat. He sat back against the wall, head bowed. The air felt heavy, pressing down on him. Suddenly, a flood of memory crashed through him. The sound of gunfire, the heat of a desert night. The face of Private Danny Morales. Barely 20. Freckles on sunburned cheeks. always humming under his breath before missions. Ethan saw again the flash of light, the sandstorm of debris, the silence afterward. He remembered dragging Morales out, blood soaking his vest, the boy's lips forming a half smile. "Tell my mom I'm not scared." The words echoed now, identical in tone, across 70 years of history. Ethan's breath came ragged. He pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes, fighting the wave of old guilt. He had told himself for years that some things couldn't be undone, that forgiveness was a story for other men. But here, in this buried cellar, he felt something shift. Grace had lost her husband. Lila had died trying to find him. Maybe it wasn't too late for their story to be told. Max broke the silence with a soft whine. He pressed his muzzle against Ethan's arm, his breath warm against cold skin. Ethan lowered his hand and met the dog's gaze. Max's eyes were deep, steady, grounding him like a compass in fog. "Yeah," Ethan whispered. "I know. We'll make it right." He wrapped the bracelet and letter back in the oilcloth and tucked them into his jacket pocket. Then he lifted the little notebook. Its cover was soft, the pages blank except for a childish scrawl on the inside, "Property of Lila Holloway, age 7. He ran a finger over the words. The ink was smudged, but the innocence behind it still lived. Ethan stood, brushing off the dirt. The ceiling groaned faintly above. He looked toward the collapsed wall. "That's where it happened," he murmured. "The other side of that is probably the old access door she mentioned." He knew it was hopeless to dig through alone, but he didn't need to. He just needed to tell someone, to make sure no one forgot. Max barked once, the sound sharp and clear in the enclosed space. "Yeah, partner," Ethan said, managing a thin smile. "We're getting out." He climbed the ladder first, Max close behind. The cellar's breath followed them upward, a last whisper of the buried past. Back in the dim parlor, Ethan knelt by the fire again, the oilcloth in his hands. The flames reflected in his eyes, flickering between grief and peace. "You're free now, kid," he said quietly. Outside, the mist began to lift from the trees. Somewhere far off, a gull cried over the sea. Ethan looked toward the gray horizon and whispered, "It's time to bring you home." The dawn came pale and quiet, washing the forest in shades of silver. The storm had passed, leaving the world stunned in its stillness. Ethan stepped outside the Manor's broken door, the morning air sharp and clean after days of decay. The sea glittered beyond the trees, calm now, as if it too had mourned through the night. Max padded beside him, his fur damp but glinting in the weak light, tail sweeping low in the frost. Together, they stood for a moment, just breathing, the first peaceful breath in what felt like years. Ethan climbed into his truck and turned the key. This time, the engine caught on the first try, coughing once before settling into a steady rumble. "Guess we're not done yet," he murmured, glancing at Max, who tilted his head in quiet acknowledgement. The road away from the manor wound through pines heavy with snow, branches bowing under the weight. He drove in silence, the diary and the oilcloth bundle resting on the passenger seat between them like sacred relics. By mid-morning, he reached the small coastal town of Hartfield. The streets were nearly empty, save for a few locals clearing snow from their porches. Ethan parked outside the sheriff's office, a squat brick building with faded blue shutters. Inside, the smell of coffee and wet wool greeted him. Behind the counter stood Sheriff Thomas Avery, a man in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many small-town tragedies. His voice carried the kind of patience that came from years of holding silence for others. "Morning," Avery said, looking up from a stack of paperwork. "You look like you've been through hell." Ethan set the oilcloth bundle on the counter. "I found something up by Holloway Estate," he said quietly. "Something that's been waiting 70 years. Avery frowned, the lines on his weathered face deepening. "That place?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "You're not the first drifter to go poking around there, but you're the first to walk out looking like you've seen a ghost." "I haven't," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "But I found one who never left." He explained everything, Grace's diary, the cellar, the letter from Lila, the hidden chamber. As he spoke, Avery's skepticism faded into a solemn stillness. When Ethan finished, the sheriff simply nodded. "All right," Avery said finally. "We'll get a team up there. The Holloway case was one of those mysteries folks stopped talking about." Too sad, too long ago. Maybe it's time we gave it an ending. 2 days later, a small forensic team and a county historian arrived at the manor. Ethan stood nearby with Max, watching as they uncovered the collapsed section of the cellar wall. Among the workers was Clara Jennings, a young archaeologist from the university, early 30s. Short and sharp-featured, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun. She moved with quick, precise motions and spoke little, her focus absolute. Ethan noticed her hands trembled slightly when she brushed away dirt from the small silver bracelet embedded in the soil. She paused, exhaled, and looked up at him. "You found them," she said softly. Her voice carried something deeper than professionalism, a quiet reverence. They were together. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Max sat at his feet, ears tilted back, eyes fixed on the workers with an uncanny stillness, as if he understood the gravity of what they had uncovered. When the remains were carefully lifted and placed into simple wooden caskets, Ethan turned away, staring toward the line of trees where the sea wind whispered through the branches. "They waited long enough," he murmured. A week later, the town gathered at Hartfield Cemetery for the reburial. The day was cold but bright, sunlight glancing off the snow like scattered glass. 2 modest graves stood side by side beneath a single oak. The townspeople, most of them old enough to remember the legends, stood in silence. Sheriff Avery gave a short, heartfelt speech about remembrance and the quiet duty of the living to honor the forgotten. Ethan stepped forward last. He carried the silver bracelet in his gloved hand and placed it gently atop the smaller headstone. Max lay down beside him, head on his paws. "You're home now," Ethan whispered. For the first time since the war, his voice didn't tremble when he said goodbye. After the service, Avery approached him. "You did a good thing, Cole," he said, extending his hand. "You brought peace where there was none." Ethan hesitated, then shook the man's hand. "I just listened," he replied. "They were the ones calling." That night, back in his small cabin by the woods, Ethan built a fire and sat watching Max sleep before it. The dog's chest rose and fell slowly, his ears twitching now and then, as if chasing something in a dream. Outside, snow drifted gently through the dark. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the warmth of the fire soft against his face. "You did good, partner," he said quietly. "We both did." For a long while, there was only the crackle of the fire. Then, just as sleep began to pull him under, Ethan thought he heard it, the faint, distant sound of laughter, light as wind through pine needles. A child's laugh, joyful, unafraid. He smiled without opening his eyes. Somewhere beneath the ashes of the past, light had finally found its way home. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive in flashes of lightning or thundering skies. Sometimes they come softly, through a whisper in the wind, a light in the darkness, or the warmth of a loyal friend who never leaves your side. Ethan's story reminds us that even when life feels broken, when silence fills our hearts and we've forgotten what hope feels like, God is still working behind the scenes. He heals in His own time. He restores in ways we may not see, and sometimes He sends a small sign, a found letter, a loyal dog, or a long-lost truth, to remind us that faith never dies. No matter how long your storm has lasted, remember this: light will always find its way beneath the ashes. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to pray for peace, for healing, for every soul still waiting for their miracle. Share this story. Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so more hearts can be reminded of God's quiet power and endless mercy. May God bless you, protect your family, and fill your home with light, love, and unshakable faith. Because even in the darkest night, He is still there.